Today, we're diving into 9 chilling true stories from the rangers who guard one of America's most stunning and enigmatic natural wonders, Yellowstone National Park. Beyond the erupting geysers, abundant wildlife, and throngs of annual visitors lies a shadowy underbelly that rarely gets discussed. The accounts you'll hear are from dedicated rangers who operate in solitude, traversing isolated backcountry paths, handling unreported emergencies, and encountering phenomena that challenge all logic. These aren't mere ghost stories for amusing park guests. They're authentic reports from seasoned professionals. We've carefully compiled and adapted them from official logs, first-hand statements, and long-shared cautions among those familiar with the park's hidden realities. For privacy, we've altered names and specific identifiers, yet the essence of every story stays faithful to the original records. Let's start with the first ranger and the eerie presence he met amid the geyser vapors, an encounter that lingers in his nightmares even now. Caleb could never quite figure out why the park insisted on solo nighttime rounds in the upper geyser basin. Yet after 6 years working there, he'd given up probing into unchangeable policies. Darkness brought a raw authenticity to the place once visitors vanished. No more hordes of people, no snapping photos, no rumbling buses, just rising vapors, inky blackness, and the steady rumble of superheated water churning underground. On crisp evenings, stars spilled across the walkways like a vast, icy sea. But when mist rolled in, the basin transformed into an otherworldly realm. It was deep into September, that transitional period when the climate wavered between fall and the onset of winter. A sharp breeze nipped at any bare skin, while plumes from the geysers and thermal pools hung in the atmosphere like a sentient shroud. That evening, the haze was denser than Caleb remembered seeing in ages. It swirled at his ankles and drifted over the timbered paths, engulfing the barriers just ahead, making the trail dissolve into a solid barrier of opacity. He proceeded with deliberate caution, as was his habit after the clock struck 12. Hurrying along these elevated routes invited disaster. Flanking the slim walkways, the terrain was treacherous, a fragile shell atop searing, corrosive pools that could break down flesh in moments. He'd sat through the safety briefings countless times. A single wrong footfall, a stumble, a fractured guardrail, and dawn would bring nothing left to find. In this wild expanse, the planet offered no mercy for errors. His shoulder radio hissed faintly as he glanced at the hour. 1:17 a.m. The end of his watch loomed far off at dawn. He'd already circled the edges by the visitor hub and secured the access road barrier. Now came the thermal circuits. Just him, his beam of light, and the subtle rhythmic exhale of steam seeping from the soil. Routine shifts passed without incident. He'd note trivial issues for the day team. An unsecured waste bin cover, a discarded water bottle, a wobbly plank for repairs come morning. But from the instant he entered the basin circuit that night, a sense of being observed gripped him. Such sensations weren't rare in the park, particularly after dark, when deer eyes might gleam from the shadows or foxes shadowed him beyond his flashlight's reach. This, however, carried a sharper edge. It felt intimate, like an invisible pressure at the base of his skull. Caleb dismissed it as the elements playing tricks. Mist warped acoustics, drawing distant sounds nearer. Even so, his fingers clenched the torch handle tighter as he traced the walkway's bend toward a group of lesser-known basins that sightseers often overlooked for the blockbuster displays. He halted at the initial fork, directing his light into the vapors. The glow faded mere steps away, devoured by the blankness. His surroundings narrowed to a damp patch of decking underfoot and the ghostly outline of nearby rails. Everything else vanished. "You're good," he whispered to himself. "Just another circuit on another evening." The initial occurrence nearly escaped his notice. As he pressed on, static flickered from his radio, trailed by a muffled, warped murmur resembling speech. He froze, tilting toward it, anticipating a colleague's update. Silence held the frequency. The monitor displayed their standard district channel with no incoming calls visible. He hit the transmit key. "This is Caleb patrolling the upper geyser loop. Does anyone read me?" Only quiet followed. After a pause, his colleague's familiar dispatch tone broke through from the base, crisp now, inquiring about his position. He answered back, chalking up the previous glitch to signal noise, and pressed onward. When he arrived at the loop's central stretch, the mist had grown denser. It advanced in languid swells across the hot springs, shimmering softly where the pools caught glints from stars and far-off resort glows. His footsteps echoed a consistent beat on the damp planks. Off to his left, a geyser wheezed before letting out a ragged breath that echoed eerily like a weary exhale. He concentrated on running through his mental rundown. Barriers secure, signs legible, pathways clear of people. Midway in his internal scan, the radio buzzed once more, a murmur buried in the crackle, sufficient to spike his pulse. "Quote 2, he said, raising his hand to tweak the dial. Now there was no doubt. Beneath the static's rasp, his name emerged. Caleb. It was soft, as if echoing from a distance, yet the pronunciation felt off. The inflection lacked any rise or fall, each part equally heavy, like an outsider experimenting with the word's form. It evoked the awkward way tourists botch local landmarks, precise yet utterly mistaken. He halted his steps. The vapor swirled along the walkway, grazing his legs. He pivoted deliberately through a complete turn, his light piercing brief paths into the haze. No shadows, no stirrings, only the eddying clouds. He thumbed the radio once more, keeping his tone even. "Unit 2? You monitor in this frequency? Was that you trying to reach me?" The response arrived shortly, puzzled. Negative, nobody had tried contacting him. All was silent at headquarters. Could be crosstalk from a nearby band. It cropped up occasionally during bad weather. Caleb acknowledged politely and secured the device, striving to ignore how the prior utterance had seemed so close. As if whispered beside him. He reasoned it was fatigue. The busy period was winding down. Those late hours were stacking up. Minds could easily invent shapes in the static, spotting illusions where none existed. He continued along the path as it bent around a broader basin. The liquid gleamed an eerie blue-green, even under dim conditions. The top lay serene, yet lethally hot. Slender wisps of vapor rose, smudging the boundary between soil and liquid. He eyed the caution plaque fixed to the barrier. Remain on walkway. Terrain unstable, boiling hazards. The illustration depicted a stick figure with a foot-piercing thin surface, the form melting into stylized flames. Training had exposed him to grimmer images, actual incidents. He regretted recalling them. He quickened his stride a bit, unusually keen to clear this zone. Rounding the pool's distant edge, the mist ahead parted briefly, revealing the trail's faint contour as it sloped down, then climbed toward a group of modest vents. In that fleeting gap, a form appeared amid the vapor plain. It stood roughly 30 yards beyond the safe route, in a forbidden zone. Initially, he figured it for a stray guest who'd slipped through security, but the stance didn't fit. The frame was unnaturally rigid, limbs dangling in an odd limbo, not fully extended, not truly flexed. From afar, it faced his direction, yet details blurred into a mere shadow against the white. Caleb's mouth turned parched. Reflex kicked in. He lifted the torch, switched to full power, and directed the ray at the silhouette. The beam struck the haze and diffused. For an instant, the contours clarified. It occupied a spot from the service charts he knew supported only tiny creatures at best, not people. The profile deviated from any human norm. Shoulders appeared overly slim. The neck stretched a touch too far, akin to a kid's sketch that's nearly accurate. Then the clouds reformed, erasing the sight. "Hello there," he shouted, his words dwarfed by the basin's endless hush. Quote 5. No response, no motion. The chill that had prickled at his nape now raced downward, pooling in his stomach. He understood the risks of straying from the planks, lessons hammered home since orientation. One mishap couldn't justify another. For wanderers in the thermal zone, guidelines demanded retreat, report via radio, and hold for morning backup. He grasped the communicator anew. Just as his finger neared the switch, the sound came back, sharper this time. The sound was so near that even without his radio on or the earpiece in place, Caleb could have sworn it echoed from the speaker itself. Quote 6. A chill prickled the hairs under his sleeves. It resembled his own tone, not a perfect match, but near enough in cadence and inflection like an imitation honed after years of close observation. He gazed into the rising vapor where the shape had lingered, then willed himself back to protocol. Record details, stay on firm ground, report the incident. Unit 2, Upper Geyser Basin. His transmission came out clipped. Potential intruder in the hot spring zone, roughly 30 yards east of the mid-loop pool. Send backup for confirmation. After a short delay, dispatch responded. Roads were slick with ice. It'd be at least 20 minutes before help arrived. They queried his line of sight. He scanned once more. The mist had grown denser, curling like exhaled air on glass. No outline, no stir. Just endless pale haze. Negative, he replied. Target vanished, holding position on the walkway. He lingered there, ears straining. The basin seldom fell quiet, yet that night the typical noises dulled, as though the entire terrain had been subdued in volume. The vent's sizzle seemed subdued too. His breaths rang clearer than the surroundings. Resuming his patrol at a cautious pace, he swept his gaze side to side. Nearing the next minor geyser, the vapors parted briefly, revealing a glimpse of the expanse. There it stood again, nearer this time, still beyond the safety barrier, turned toward him. Its stance had altered, head cocked as if appraising him. He held back from shining his light. No need for sharper clarity. Quote 9, he projected, adopting the calm rhythm drilled into them for distressed visitors. Quote 10, the silhouette remained frozen. The haze sealed shut like a dropped drape. When it cleared next, the spot lay deserted. Backup found him after he'd circled the path twice over, his footsteps imprinting damp trails on the wood. They combed the site till sunrise. The fragile ground bore no tracks. No disrupted edges, no unusual heat traces aside from standard emissions, later confirmed by the thermal imaging. His account stayed as factual as he could make it. At the close, he tacked on a single note, unknown audio disruption via radio. He omitted how, en route to the outpost, the voice had uttered his name once more, carrying a hint of satisfaction. He attempted to dismiss it. Park wardens encountered peculiarities often: eerie glows, tricks of the mist, motionless deer in shadows, the brain weaving tales from voids. He convinced himself that's all it was. For about a week, the idea held. Then, one shift's eve, the outpost chief drew him apart, clutching a bundle of faded logs. An archivist digitizing records had spotted a recurring anomaly in Caleb's patrol zone. Quote 12, the chief remarked, pushing the yellowed sheets his way. The oldest entry dated over 10 years prior, penned by a warden long gone in a vehicle crash. The script was neat, methodical, but the content chilled, not vague. Quote 13. Caleb turned to the following file. 7 years on, another warden, identical route, matching range, echoing wording. Quote 14, 4 accounts altogether, spaced out across years, each recounting the phenomenon with minor phrasing shifts, heavy vapors, a presence in forbidden terrain, a transmission voicing a name it couldn't know. The most recent, from 2 winters back, came from the predecessor he'd succeeded upon her request for a transfer. Beside the official recap, in cramped finer letters, she'd jotted an extra remark. It seems like it's rehearsing. On her initial encounter, the name came out garbled. By my final evening there, it mimicked me flawlessly. That winter, as mists enveloped the springs and the planks faded into obscurity, Caleb pressed on with his circuits. Duty demanded it. Yet he dialed his radio down, and should the crackle morph into a murmur, he stayed mute. He conversed solely with the active staff. When his shift wrapped up, he hurried along, sticking to the middle of the walkways, avoiding any glance into the mist where some sluggish creature might lurk, waiting to spot a returnee. Sophie had long viewed Shoshone Lake as the park's hidden gem. Few tourists ever glimpsed it. No throngs gathered at viewpoints. No paths crisscrossed its edges. No stores hawked souvenirs emblazoned with its title. Getting to the water required either a vessel or a lengthy trek. And those visiting Yellowstone typically craved erupting springs and wildlife by the road, not extended strokes through chilly depths beneath a vast, barren expanse. That worked perfectly for Sophie. Serving as a ranger on lake duty, she relished how this section of the park seemed more owned by nature's forces than by visitors. On bright dawns, the lake appeared serene. Its calm, shadowy expanse was interrupted solely by a fish's subtle disturbance or the trail from a far-off paddle. Steep woods rose sharply from the banks, packed with pines and evergreens, framing the liquid as if it were a natural basin etched into the wild. But on misty mornings, everything shifted. Vapors lifted in ragged layers, hovering just above the water, softening the outlines of trees and coast until the distant line dissolved. On such outings, Sophie sensed her isolation most acutely. Tiny, adrift, and faintly unsure where the lake merged into the heavens. She first spotted the tracks during one of those shrouded days toward the end of July. She'd set out from the ranger pier before daybreak, easing her modest-powered craft into the dim haze. The chill bit enough to form wispy clouds with each exhale. The motor's reliable purr vibrated underfoot as she steered along her standard path, skimming close to the edge to inspect for forbidden setups, illicit blazes, or wayward boaters. The view was limited. Her surroundings narrowed to a hazy circle of dim liquid ringed by vague shadows of earth. As she approached a slim inlet on the lake's west flank, daylight had risen sufficiently to tint the haze from somber ash to soft amber. Sophie killed the motor, allowing the vessel to float freely, attuned to the soft lapping against its sides. The inlet ran shallow, attracting flotsam now and then. She routinely paused to survey the margin. The marks caught her eye immediately. A series of barefooted impressions in the moist grit, beginning at the waves and heading straight toward the interior. Belonging to an adult human, they were precisely formed, with toes and heels distinctly etched, as though stamped fresh just before. Unlike the chaotic jumble from children splashing in and out, these showed precision, uniform gaps, nearly delicate. Sophie scowled and maneuvered nearer, nosing the front onto the strand without jarring. She disembarked, her footwear yielding a bit in the soaked grains, and knelt by the initial trace. The clarity unnerved her. Distinct toe forms, a subtle curve, the foot's pad softly contoured, free from any boot's imprint. "Hello!" she shouted, pivoting toward the wooded fringe. "Park ranger? Anyone around?" Nothing. The thicket past the slim shore strip was impenetrable, limbs interwoven, floor shadowy. No shelter poked from the foliage. No garments dangled on improvised cords. No replies echoed. She traced the trail. It pressed onward in a direct route along the strand, identical in scale and press each time. No trails of scraping, no hints of faltering. The maker had proceeded steadily, without rush. As she distanced from the edge, the ground firmed, lightening the indents somewhat, yet they stayed sharp. Roughly 20 feet from the start, the path halted abruptly. No stone, no fallen trunk, no shift in the surface explained it. A single mark, then bare expanse. Sophie paused, eyes fixed on the final one. Her thoughts raced to possible reasons. The walker had hit firmer soil that resisted prints. They'd wheeled around sharply, overlaying their retreat, or leapt aside onto unyielding turf. She searched for evidence. Zilch. The area near the end was even overall, a thin shell atop deeper moisture. No subtle shifts, no scrapes, no flattened chutes where the shore met sparse scrub. A chill crept up her spine. She retreated, snapping images on her device. Record now, ponder after. Back at the craft, she noted it in her log. Solitary line of human bare feet rising from the lake, ending halfway across the beach without obvious departure. No signs of visitors. conditions steady, with ground-level mist. Come shifts close, she raised it with her boss. He heard her out, forehead creased, then dismissed it, with a lift of his shoulders. Likely some prankster at play, he figured. Folks love those eerie trail tales. Could be they looped back along the same path, and the murk obscured it. She agreed with a nod, as the explanation aligned neatly with their structured realm of regulations, documentation, and constrained schedules. Yet that evening, reclining in her modest cabin within the park's accommodations, she tuned in to the breeze rustling the pine trees, her thoughts repeatedly returning to that final crisp imprint in the pristine sand just past it. 2 weeks on, she encountered them once more. Now it was along the eastern edge, in a modest cove where the terrain sloped to form a welcoming arc of shoreline. The weather was bright, the heavens a stark azure, the lake reflecting brilliant flecks of sunlight. Having completed an inspection of an authorized camping spot by the water, Sophie was making her way back to the core of Chaussonny when a faint streak on the far-off beach drew her attention. She eased back the engine and directed the vessel closer. As it approached, tension knotted in her gut. The tracks were unmistakable, particularly now that she recognized the signs from afar. Barefoot impressions, identical in length and consistent stride, appearing anew from the water's edge, suggesting their creator had simply emerged from the depths. This time, she traced them with hesitation, secretly wishing for some clear explanation that would render the initial sighting insignificant in hindsight. A mere joke, or a stray swimmer from an adjacent site. But no such luck. The trail ascended the shore, halted about 15 feet from the waves, and dissolved into undisturbed grains. No campsites in sight. No canoes beached nearby. The closest approved overnight zone sat half a mile off, and she'd only just departed it, its residents being anglers clad in sturdy waders, their equipment openly displayed. Sophie snapped additional pictures. She gauged the gaps between the marks, verifying they aligned with the prior sequence to within mere centimeters. She recorded the second occurrence with greater detail than before. 2 observations formed a trajectory, however unwelcome its implications. Raising the matter at the subsequent weekly meeting, she drew light-hearted quips from a few colleagues, lake specters, unseen bathers. Her managers proposed it might be one individual, a quirky resident fond of dawn swims who had mastered treading so delicately as to mislead them. Sophie stayed stone-faced. The notion of anyone so attuned to the patrol routes as to deposit those traces across various spots, undetected, filled her with unease rather than relief. The third sighting nearly prompted her to look away. It fell in mid-August. A thick, ground-hugging mist had draped the surface during the night, denser than anything that season. Her route hugged the southern perimeter, where secluded coves and narrow inlets tucked into the landscape, like precise incisions in cloth. Visibility shrank to her craft, the encircling haze and sporadic spectral shapes of foliage. She'd just relayed her coordinates via radio, a routine update, all normal. As the boat glided beyond a slender promontory protruding into the water, a break in the vapor revealed a light sweep of beach. And there, The recognizable sequence of indentations stretched from the surf. The impulse hit her to accelerate and feign ignorance, but obligation and intrigue prevailed, as usual, veering her course. She idled the motor, disembarked, the mist coiling at her shins. These impressions were newer, tiny beads of moisture lingering in the deepest grooves, hinting the lever had only recently come aground. She knelt and brushed the rim of one. The grains felt chilled and silky, untouched by the dim glow. "Hello," she announced, her tone firmer than last. "This is a controlled enforcement zone. If you're out here, identify yourself." The murk devoured her words. They returned as a subdued rebound, faint enough to evoke the illusion of another voice murmuring her phrase from deeper within. Her radio buzzed softly at her side, then silenced. She pursued the path, tallying strides to steady her mind. 7, 8, 9. At the 10th, it halted abruptly, one soul ahead of the prior duo, then oblivion. She paused at that ultimate trace, pivoting deliberately in a gradual spin, peering into the obscurity. The banks on both flanks stretched evenly, flawless. The water astern rested calm, fading into blankness, mere yards out. The woods ahead resolved into vague shadows. For the first instance, she pondered if the boundary she'd long presumed separated her from the lake might be far more fragile than imagined. Perhaps hidden rhythms and origins lurked in this expanse beyond her grasp, trails defying the logic of soil, liquid, and pressure. The radio sparked to life. "Quote 20, her boss inquired. "Quote 21. She lifted the receiver, gaze fixed on the barren expanse forward. "Quote 22, she replied. "Quote 23. Silence lingered. Then, "Quote 24. She nearly pointed out to him that erosion wouldn't create distinct toe impressions, but she held her tongue. Instead, she nodded in agreement, snapped her pictures, and headed back to the boat without glancing at the prints once more. That evening, she laid out all the developed photographs across her modest kitchen table, 3 clusters of footprints in 3 separate spots. Lined up together, the parallels jumped out. Identical foot contours, comparable step lengths, identical starts from the lake's edge, and sudden halts farther inland. If a human had made them, the consistency was strangely precise. If it was some prank, it was meticulously planned and synced perfectly with her rounds. On a whim, she accessed the department's archive of past incident logs. The database allowed queries by terms and sites. She entered variations of Shoshone footprints tracks and scanned the results. Amid a pile of mundane, decade-old records, one entry grabbed her attention. 15 years prior, a lake warden had documented bizarre human-resembling tracks seeming to emerge from the water by Western Cove, cutting off sharply. No linked campers. The entry closed with a chilling remark that sent a shiver across Sophie's skin. Possibly connected to 1960s drowning in vicinity, suggest ongoing vigilance. She probed further. Dusty paper records in an aging file drawer revealed the details. A lone kayaker in his mid-20s, an experienced swimmer, had disappeared amid a fierce squall. His flipped kayak had beached close to the initial cove where Sophie had spotted the prints tracks. His remains were never found. In the ensuing months, 2 different wardens noted mysterious bare footprints in the vicinity. Then the mentions ceased. Perhaps it was all chance. Lakes claimed lives. Undercurrents and chill depths could conceal a corpse far beyond expectations. Footprints eroded away, personnel changed, legends dimmed. Still, in the days ahead, Sophie found herself pausing whenever her route neared those inlets. She carried on with her duties. She inspected for sights, surveyed the woodlands, and monitored for illicit blazes. But she steered her vessel a bit offshore. When docking was necessary, she moved swiftly and methodically, her gaze darting from the beach to the waves, braced for fresh tracks materializing before her. Late one season, as early fall crisped the atmosphere, she reached the first western inlet at daybreak. The mist hung lighter than on prior trips, sheer as a veil. Drawing near, she could make out the shoreline plainly. No marks scarred the grains. A wave of ease eased the tension in her torso. She killed the motor, gliding nearer, savoring the serene hush for an instant. Then, right before her eyes, the initial mark took form. The sand near the lapping edge caved in as though by an unseen soul. It sank further, curved, digits etching sequentially in a fluid, purposeful sequence. A complete nude footprint materialized where smooth sand had lain moments ago. Her inhale caught. The craft swayed with her abrupt lean. A second mark bloomed just ahead, molding without apparent force. Then a third, a trail inching steadily uphill toward the spot where prior series had terminated. This time, she stayed silent. She didn't disembark. She remained utterly motionless, clutching the gunwales until her knuckles ached, observing as the last impression solidified. And the phantom perambulator's route concluded at the customary random spot midway across the strand. The atmosphere turned abruptly chillier. Even the sparse haze felt denser, crowding in. Her radio stayed mute. She eased backward, retreating the boat from the bank, reluctant to avert her eyes from the sight until remoteness and perspective shrank the prince into obscurity. Afterward, attempting to recount the event, the description seemed feeble, akin to recounting a terror dream to one untouched by such fears. She recorded it regardless, as rangers must. They document occurrences including those that defy norms. Over subsequent years, fresh recruits queried her on Chaussonni's riskier zones during storms or prime spots for boat and sight care. She covered abrupt gusts, hazardous submerged ledges, and the need for flotation gear. Then casually tacked on another tip. And should you beach along those shores, she'd warn, spotting a lone row of bare prints rising from the waves and halting midway to the woods, don't pursue the maker. She never elaborated. She skipped the spectral strides that had etched the world anew in her view. She omitted the vintage submersion case or the prior wardens who'd jotted akin observations before resuming routines, ignoring the lake's subtle shoreward nudge with mortal souls. Certain lessons had dawned on her. The wilderness sought no dissection. It merely demanded observation and retention. Nathan often quipped that the weathered patrol cabin on the park's eastern edge had outlasted him in service. He'd served as a Yellowstone ranger for a dozen years, while the structure had stood for almost 8 decades. Perched at the terminus of a slim side trail about 1.5 miles from the primary path frequented by tourists, it was near enough to act as a refuge in crises, yet remote enough that only dedicated trekkers ever found it. To the untrained observer, it blended seamlessly into the surrounding woods as yet another relic of history. For Nathan, though, it marked a routine stop on his patrols, somewhere to top off his canteen from the rainwater cask, jot notes in the register, and verify no intruders had tampered with it. During his initial summer as a novice, the sight of the cabin brought a sense of reassurance. Built from 4 sturdy hewn logs, topped with a corrugated metal roof, featuring 1 modest pane of glass and a sturdy entrance secured by an iron latch. The interior held a simple cot, a workbench, and a rack holding basic survival items: dressings, purifying agents for water, a compact burner, and a worn guide to emergency care from well before his time. A coiled notepad rested on the surface alongside a writing instrument, where every passing warden recorded the day, hour, and any key occurrences. With time, the spot etched itself into Nathan's internal layout of the wilderness. It stood as one of those unchanging anchors amid a terrain that transformed relentlessly across the cycles: winter gales bowing branches, blazes altering slopes, streams carving new courses. Yet the cabin endured. When tempests arrived ahead of schedule, he'd slip within, brush off the downpour from his coat, and hunker down through the peak fury, attuned to the steady patter against the shingles. It wasn't until nearly 10 years in that he sensed an irregularity. The initial anomaly was understated, readily overlooked. On a blustery June day, weary from an extended circuit skirting 3 remote bivouacs and an isolated path crossing, he arrived under a brooding overcast sky, hinting at evening gales. As he topped the final gentle incline and spotted the building, the entrance stood marginally open. He knit his brow. It was protocol for rangers to secure it upon departure. This wasn't an open invitation. Such breaches could deplete provisions or invite destruction, occasionally graver issues. He advanced with caution, straining for sounds from within, one palm on the shoulder-mounted communicator, the other hovering by the grisly deterrent at his belt. "This is Park Service," he announced from a short distance. "If you're in there, identify yourself." Nothing responded. No footfalls, no startled chatter, no frantic rustling, merely the far-off whisper of breeze in the foliage and the faint creak of the roofing contracting against the warmth. He nudged the panel wider, bracing for perhaps a fatigued traveler sprawled on the bedding, or a pair envisioning a quaint overnight in an authentic outpost. But the space appeared pristine. Bedding neatly arranged, burner spotless atop the bench, racks fully provisioned just as before. The sole discrepancy was the register splayed across the midpoint of the table rather than shut. He entered, scanned the recesses, then approached the pad. The most recent notation was his, from 4 days back. He leafed through the pages, hunting for unfamiliar script. None appeared. It seemed as though nobody had visited since him, yet proximity had evidently allowed the entry to swing and the volume to shift. He attributed it to the elements, a sudden blast perhaps loosening an imperfect fastener, or a rodent nudging the pad off kilter. Fatigue could magnify minor quirks into puzzles. He fastened the door securely, tested the mechanism, inscribed the present moment in the record, and departed. He came back after a fortnight. The entrance was shut this time, the fastener engaged, but as he pulled it ajar, he instantly detected evidence of occupancy. The cot's cover bore wrinkles not from idle air currents or accumulated grit, but a clear imprint suggesting recent human form in the middle. The cushion showed a subtle stain, as if a head had lingered there not long ago. Beside the register on the bench lay a discarded packaging from a product absent from the area's official depots. He exhaled, retrieving his device to snap an image. Another instance of improper access. Report would be necessary. It occurred now and then. Folks trapped by weather acting on impulse, taking what they needed. Troublesome, yes, but routine. He opened the register, mentally outlining the documentation. The latest note wasn't his. In precise, tight penmanship, an account from 2 evenings before appeared. No identifier, no credentials, merely a brief remark. Steady downpour through the dark hours. Shelter's a blessing. The endorsement space remained empty. Nathan gazed at it. All personnel in the area followed a standard protocol. Identifier, arrival, path, observations. Even under pressure, one dashed at least a moniker. This seemed intentional, mimicking protocol without true investment. That night, Nathan radioed the office to check. No other rangers had been assigned to that area. Nobody had mentioned stopping at the cabin. His boss advised him to watch the place, but not to worry too much about some lost backpacker hiding from a downpour. He made an effort to brush it off. For a bit, it worked. Throughout the summer, he stopped by the cabin weekly at minimum. Occasionally, everything inside seemed undisturbed. Other times, he noticed minor traces of activity. A chair shifted just a touch, a cup misplaced, or a subtle whiff of doused firewood with no residue in the fireplace to explain it. The journal always showed fresh, brief notes. 2 nights spent. Peaceful. Nobody showed up. Secure spot. Nathan began snapping photos of every page using his cell phone. The script varied slightly from one entry to the next, as though the author was tweaking their hold or speed, yet the peculiar wording stayed the same. Just month and day, nothing more. No personal details, no hint that they recognized the breach of regulations. It gnawed at him more than made sense. The park spanned vast territory. Folks ignored petty rules constantly. What really got to him was the feeling of an intruder claiming a warden's territory, aping official routines, and sneaking through the gaps. By the end of August, he chose to monitor it closely. He planned his patrols to arrive at the cabin in the late day and linger until morning. An unsanctioned stay excused by the far-off location of his following route. His superior okayed it with a casual lift of the shoulders, suggesting he make the most of the complimentary shelter. Nathan pulled up right as daylight faded over the mountain crest. From afar, the structure appeared unchanged, a compact shadowed shape amid the pines. Now, though, the entrance was bolted, the latch fastened correctly. Using his own key, he let himself in and instantly sensed another visitor had passed through earlier. The cover on the cot lay folded with care, unlike the casual, uneven fold he and the team typically applied. It was exact, edges crisp, like something from boot camp. The journal rested on the desk, accompanied by one lone metal utensil. That implement didn't fit the setup. Supplies in the cabin were limited and fixed. 3 cups, a worn skillet, a teapot, the heater, no extra cutlery. This one seemed fresh, gleaming, marked by a tiny notch near the tip from an overly firm bite years back. He lifted it gingerly between thumb and forefinger and flipped it. Etched into the reverse side, close to the stem, was a word gouged in with a pointed tool. In the low glow, it first resembled a factory mark. Then he deciphered it. Stay. Goosebumps prickled his forearms. He replaced the item carefully and compelled himself to run the standard inspection. Examine the bed. Inspect the heater. Scan the cupboards. The rest aligned perfectly. Flipping open the journal revealed the latest note in that familiar compact handwriting, timed to earlier that day. Storm approaching. Returning shortly. He gazed at the words, a shift from mild disquiet to rising irritation washing over him. An outsider was treating the outpost as their secret retreat, bold enough for notes, smart enough to vanish before his arrivals. He resolved to wait for their return. Adding his signature, the hour, a remark on the illicit occupancy demanding further probe, he then got comfortable. He slid the desk to the wall across from the entryway, positioning the cot for an unobstructed sightline to the threshold. Extinguishing the lamp to conserve oil, he allowed his sight to adapt to the shadows. Beyond the walls, dusk turned from slate to indigo to pitch. Precipitation started gently, building to a persistent patter against the ceiling. Time dragged on. He tuned into the tempest and the sporadic groans of contracting timber. The air carried scents of aged lumber, moist fabric, and a lingering sharp bite from the utensil, which still caught the faint light beside the journal. His eyes drooped. He snapped them wide twice. He nodded off briefly a couple of times, his peripheral view blurring. Past the stroke of 12, an unfamiliar noise broke the quiet. A boot on the veranda. Soft, deliberate, then a second step, a third. The rhythm didn't match wildlife, too light for a grizzly, lacking the frantic scamper of rodents fleeing the wet. It evoked a person versed in stealth, though the aged planks at the portal gave them away regardless. Nathan held motionless. He fixed on the sliver of space beneath the entrance. A slim streak of brighter shadow appeared as far-off thunder lit the night. The fastener jiggled. With abrupt, icy realization, he recalled barring the way after entering and engaging the clasp. The outsider outside wouldn't anticipate such firmness. They'd become accustomed to easy access. The handle shook once more, with greater urgency, followed by a gentle tap, nearly courteous. All his protocol urged him to announce his presence, declare who he was, and prevent any tension from building in such a remote setting. An ancient, primal urge warned him to keep quiet. He settled for a middle ground. Quote 28, he announced steadily. Quote 29. The rapping ceased. Silence fell, broken only by the patter of rain. Then a voice filtered through the door, subdued. Quote 30. It sounded casual, nearly amiable. That word choice lingered, not. Quote 31, but quote 32, like their timetable had been disrupted. Quote 33, Nathan replied. Quote 34. A hesitation followed. The voice returned. Quote 35, it noted. Quote 36. His fingers gripped the radio instinctively. The weather could garble the signal, yet he needed to act. As he reached for the switch, the voice pressed on. Quieter, as though the speaker had pressed nearer to the panel. Quote 37, it murmured. Quote 38. A chill knotted Nathan's gut. No window overlooked his bed area. The sole vantage was the front door's narrow glass, which he curtained every evening. Nothing had ever hinted at prying eyes. With his spare hand, he ignited the lantern, prioritizing illumination over fuel savings. A soft radiance bathed the room. The spoon on the table gleamed brighter. Its etched marking appeared more ominous in the light. "Underscore! Quote underscore 39! Underscore!" he bellowed again. Quote 40. The deck groaned under shift and pressure outside. The lock jiggled briefly, then went still. Footfalls echoed once more, retreating steadily through the downpour. No frantic retreat, merely deliberate strides fading into the storm. He remained clothed and booted, vigilant until the heavens lightened and the roof's relentless drumming eased. Come first light, he eased the door open, shotgun ready. The veranda glistened with moisture but bore no distinct tracks. The deluge had already washed away any faint traces. Descending, he surveyed the surroundings and spotted just one solid clue. Beside the lowest stair, another spoon rested on the earth, matching the first in every detail, same slight indentation, same heft. Etched into its handle, more boldly now, was a new inscription: Soon. Nathan gathered both utensils, sealed them in a bag, and trekked to headquarters. There he submitted an official account. Authorities seized the items, detected no viable fingerprints, and dismissed it with the typical nonchalance reserved for anomalies that didn't demand quick fixes. The outpost remained operational. Regulations stayed the same. Formally, it served as a vital emergency outpost. In practice, fellow rangers began steering clear of night shifts there. They offered no explanations, simply rerouting patrols whenever possible. 4 weeks on, a rescue mission unveiled some answers, or fragments of them. A family hadn't returned from an extended hike. Their vehicle lingered unmolested at the trail's start. Nathan joined the team scouring the terrain. On day 2, they located the mom and younger kid, exhausted and parched, by a stream bed far from their itinerary. The dad and teen boy were still unaccounted for. In subsequent interviews, the mother described a courteous stranger who'd materialized during their second evening. He'd neared their site soundlessly, suggested a quicker path to a viewpoint overlook, and pointed out an aged shelter for bad weather. His words came in clipped, deliberate phrases, as if drawn from a prepared text. He was familiar with ranger routines, she explained, aware of patrols' presence or absence. The place is secure, she'd been told in a hush. Quote 42. His features eluded her description. Recollections blurred, yielding only vague sensations, a metallic glint as he mixed a stew, the gentle ting of utensils, his gaze that lingered even when averted. 3 days afterward, crews discovered the father and son in a gully along that uncharted detour. Wounds pointed to a tumble. Accidental or otherwise, the cause remained unclear. What haunted Nathan most was the discovery by the remains. In a prior campsite's shallow hollow, they unearthed a hidden stash, a ground sheet, some provisions, and a tin mug. Nearby, partially obscured by soil, was yet another spoon. Scored into its grip enough to buckle the surface, read 2 words: "You stay." That sealed the outpost's fate on the shutdown roster. Cited issues included decay, obsolete setup, and budget priorities. Truth be told, nobody wished to hand a stalker versed in watch rotations and drawn to the vulnerable a convenient lair. The structure was taken apart the next season. Nathan observed the beams topple, the covering stripped, the once cozy cot dismantled into scraps. The laborers hauled away all the items using mules and trucks. They believed they'd cleared out every last bit. Several weeks afterward, while passing the deserted clearing out of routine, Nathan paused. The porch stairs had vanished. The rain barrel was missing. Just a subtle outline of pressed-down soil lingered where the building once was. Something shimmered at the clearing's border, partially concealed by weeds. He approached and crouched down. It turned out to be yet another spoon identical to the previous ones. Identical indentation, identical heft, identical etched message from the hands. But this one bore no text. Only repeated lines carved repeatedly in one area, so deeply that they warped the metal into a gentle arc. As he rotated it, the design snagged the sunlight and briefly resembled letters struggling to emerge, but falling short. He abandoned it in place. In that day's logbook note, he simply recorded, "Cabin location cleared. No buildings left." He omitted any reference to the spoon. He skipped noting the sensation that whatever had sought refuge in the cabin, whatever had scrutinized timetables and mimicked script and observed dozing rangers, hadn't relied on barriers or shelter. Buildings could be taken apart. Routines and behaviors proved far tougher to dismantle. Emily had always pictured her role as a backcountry ranger involving true seclusion in its finest form. Extended treks across pristine wilds, evenings in remote huts filled solely with the whisper of breeze among the evergreens, and a stillness profound enough to let personal reflections unfold undisturbed. She finished forestry college in May 2017, submitted applications to every national park open to her, and when Yellowstone extended a temporary gig monitoring isolated campsites in the Thorar region, she agreed before they could complete reciting the details. Her family fretted. Her buddies wondered why she'd choose to isolate herself for months in such remoteness. Emily explained it was precisely the escape she craved following 4 years of packed residences and unending clamor. She yearned for room to breathe. She craved hush. She aimed to demonstrate her capability for tasks demanding independence and composure under pressure. Thorfair ranked among the remotest spots in the contiguous United States, reachable solely via lengthy foot journeys or by horse. The folks who ventured that deep were typically dedicated trekkers, equipped with bear deterrent and versed in suspending provisions correctly. Emily's duties included verifying permissions, ensuring visitors adhered to no-trace camping rules, and relaying problems to the central headquarters using a satellite communicator. Her living quarters at the outpost consisted of a modest timber cabin featuring a firewood heater, a cot, and provisions sufficient for the 2-week intervals between restocks. She took to it right away. Her initial 7 days went smoothly. She covered the inspection paths, chatted with some parties pitched along the routes, and passed her nights jotting thoughts in a notebook under lantern glow. The remoteness seemed liberating rather than daunting. On day 8, she came upon a lone hiker at a marked spot close to the southern boundary of her patrol zone. He'd pitched beneath a stand of lodgepole pines, his shelter a weathered green that merged seamlessly with the woodland ground. A modest blaze flickered in the fire pit, and he perched on a log nearby, fingers interlaced primly, gazing at the fire with a look that seemed staged. Emily drew near using the warm yet official manner she'd rehearsed. She said hello, requested his permit, and exchanged pleasantries on the conditions outside. He replied in brief, terse phrases that felt pre-planned. His name, he stated, was David. He'd been on the trail for 3 days. He intended to linger 2 more before retracing steps to the starting point. All his words were accurate, courteous, and subtly amiss in a manner Emily couldn't pinpoint at first. It resembled hearing an actor deliver memorized dialogue without fully grasping its essence. She reviewed his permit. It aligned with his account. The time frame was legitimate, the site duly booked. She returned it, advised securing edibles after dark, and bid him a pleasant night. As she started away, he spoke up once more. Quote 44, he noted. His tone stayed even, nearly affable. Quote 45. Emily halted. She glanced over her shoulder. A slender strand of discomfort tightened within her. Quote 46, she inquired, forcing casualness. He cocked his head a touch as if puzzled by the query. Quote 47, he replied. Quote 48. She reassured herself it made sense. In such outlying spots, backpackers frequently tracked patrol rhythms mentally. It offered comfort to know help would cycle through periodically. Nevertheless, the tone of his words, the lifeless quality in his speech, and the unnatural infrequency of his blinks compelled her to create some space between them. She gave a nod, muttered a quick reminder to stay cautious, and pressed on along the path. A quick look back, just before the trail curved, revealed him perched motionless on the log, fingers interlaced, gazing in her direction with that unchanging look. 3 days afterward, she made her way back to that part of her patrol. She figured David would have vanished by now. His backcountry permit allowed just 5 nights, and according to her calculations, he ought to have broken camp and begun the arduous trek out the previous day. Yet as she neared the spot, his shelter remained in place. Identical spot, identical worn-out green material, identical flames smoldering faintly in the pit. And there was David on the very same log in the exact same pose, clad in the outfit she'd observed last time. A sharper wave of discomfort washed over Emily. She advanced nearer and offered a greeting, though this time it carried far less friendliness. She inquired whether he'd sought to prolong his stay officially. He held her gaze for an extended beat before replying. Quote 49, he stated. Quote 50. She pointed out that regulations for wilderness permits were rigorously upheld, that lingering beyond the limit without approval constituted a breach, and that he must either depart or reach out to the local office for an extension request. He inclined his head gradually, like someone processing utterly new details, then assured her he'd handle the matter. His words sounded cooperative enough, yet his frame stayed rooted. He remained seated, palms together, while the flames popped softly. That night, Emily documented the interaction and relayed it via the satellite communicator. Her superior in the district advised monitoring the situation again in 2 days. Should he persist, they'd dispatch personnel to guide him away from the area. She concurred. But as she lay in her quarters that evening, the stove's metal contracting with faint clicks. She couldn't dispel the vision of David frozen in place, his eyes mirroring the glow of the embers like polished mirrors. 2 days on, she trekked there once more. The shelter lingered. The blaze endured. David occupied the log. This time, as she drew close, a smile crossed his face. Quote, 51 he uttered prior to her saying a word. She halted abruptly. She'd never shared her identity with him. Though it was embroidered on her uniform over the breast pocket, the positioning and range from their initial exchange would have obscured it. Moreover, she deliberately avoided naming herself in the subsequent meeting, a habit drilled into her during orientation for handling individuals who seemed off. Quote, 52, she declared, her tone resolute. Quote 53. He cocked his head once more, that robotic motion returning. Quote 54, he continued. Quote 5. Silence enveloped the woods nearby. Emily noticed the absence of avian calls. No rustle of breeze, only the subtle crackle of the flames and the thunder of her heartbeat resounding in her head. She retreated step by step, eyes locked on his, pivoting only once distance, allowed her to bolt without provoking pursuit. She didn't pause until she arrived at her dwelling, secured the entrance, and seized the satellite device. Come dawn, the district dispatched a pair of rangers equipped with sidearms. They proceeded as a group, with Emily directing them to the encampment. Upon reaching it, the shelter had vanished. The fire pit lay extinguished. The earth where David had positioned himself bore no fresh disturbances. However, right where the tent had stood, imprinted into the soil, lay an item that churned Emily's gut. A meticulously sketched chart, precise and thorough, depicting her residence, her inspection paths, her usual departure and arrival times, plus annotations in tight script detailing her routines, her attire, her gear, her gait. And at the foot, a roster of identities, some ticked off. Hers appeared last, untouched. They combed the vicinity for hours. No tracks departed the location. No snapped twigs suggested an escape route. It seemed David had evaporated entirely the instant Emily sought assistance. The district head reached out to authorities, who investigated the name and likeness. Nothing came up. No permits registered under it in adjacent reserves. Zero history whatsoever. Emily completed her assignment, though she applied for a shift to a more populated station the next season. To others, she attributed it to a craving for greater social contact, claiming solitude hadn't matched her hopes. She kept silent about the recurring terrors in her sleep. She kept silent about glancing warily behind her on paths or vowing never to tent solo again. Much later, in a Montana outpost, she spotted a poster for a vanished hiker. The image captured a young female beaming, last observed on an unaccompanied trek through Glacier. According to the account, a fellow hiker had spotted her chatting with a guy at a campground the previous day before she disappeared. The observer noted that the fellow appeared unusual, excessively composed, as if reciting lines from a prepared dialogue. The observer also pointed out that the man mysteriously knew the woman's name without any introduction from her. Emily gazed at the poster for what felt like ages, her fingers trembling. Her mind drifted to that roster etched in the soil, with its ticked-off entries. She pondered the vast number of isolated camping spots scattered throughout countless parks, and how straightforward it would be for an individual to shift from one to another, observing habits, tracking habits, biding time, until the perfect opportunity arose when a vanishing wouldn't register until long after the fact. She avoided returning to the Thorar ever again. Whenever folks sought her tips on solo hiking trips, her response was always identical. Rely on your gut feelings. If somebody gives off bad vibes, they likely do. And should you encounter a camper privy to details they have no business knowing, don't linger to uncover the reason. Get out right away and keep moving forward without glancing behind. Certain individuals stay so serene only because they've already plotted their subsequent move. Aaron took pride in his role as a fact-driven ranger. Armed with a wildlife biology degree, 3 animal tracking credentials, and a full shelf of reference manuals in his staff quarters, he handled things methodically. When guests approached him with frantic tales of odd beasts lurking in the forest, he'd hear them out courteously, probe for details, and then calmly clarify the true identity. Most often, 9 cases in 10, it turned out to be a bear rearing up or an elk slipping through the underbrush. The rare 10th instance stemmed from overactive minds and sleep deprivation. Aaron appreciated that balance. It rendered the environment predictable, comprehensible, and secure. Yellowstone brimmed with genuine hazards. Bison could end you. Grizzlies could end you. Tumbling into a thermal pool could end you. No point conjuring fictional horrors when the area already overflowed with authentic perils to encourage vigilance. Aaron focused on instilling proper regard for real wildlife, not stoking fears of non-existent threats. That mindset held firm through 7 seasons. Crumbling only in the 8th summer when alerts began trickling in from the northern sector by the Lamar Valley boundary. The initial alert hit in mid-June. A family pitched near a trailhead had broken camp at dawn, rattled to the core, insisting an entity had prowled around their site through the night. They called it bear-like, yet distorted, overly upright in stature. Eyes that caught the beam in an unnatural hue unfamiliar to any creature. Motions that felt intentional, inquisitive, as though appraising them instead of hunting food. Aaron documented the incident, posed the routine inquiries, and classified it as a likely black bear sighting, amplified by night and nerves. Black bears could get assertive. Their gazes might gleam strangely based on light direction. Folks often misjudged dimensions or actions under stress. A week on, the next account surfaced. A pair of seasoned trekkers, both around 40 with years of backcountry miles under their belts, recounted noises from a hefty form shadowing them along a ridgeline path right after sunset. They claimed it matched their stride for almost a mile, snapping twigs at an elevation odd for any 4-legged beast. Halting brought it to a halt. Directing their beams into the tree line yielded fleeting views of a lofty, shadowy figure that retreated with eerie fluidity, as if grasping the implication of illumination. The following day, Aaron scouted the path alongside a tech colleague, Julia. They spotted abundant elk traces, somewhat recent grizzly droppings, and several broken limbs attributable to gusts or a bull moose shedding antler fuzz. Nothing conclusive in prints, no fur, 0 signs of anomaly. Quote 56, Julia remarked with a casual lift of her shoulders on the return trek. Quote 57, Aaron concurred. He filed the episode as probable big bear activity, absent signs of hostility, and reminded visitors about securing meals and creating din. By late June's third week, he'd tallied 6 comparable incidents, clustered in that vicinity, each portraying an entity that resembled a bear but fell short. Details differed slightly. Some noted bipedal motion over quadrupedal. Others highlighted disproportionate appendages. A handful insisted on eerie imitations of wildlife sounds that rang false. Yet the essence aligned closely enough to chip away at Aaron's confidence. He sought clearance to deploy trail cams on the frequently cited paths. Approval came swiftly. In 2 days, he and Julia installed 8 motion-triggered devices on trunks and stakes, aimed at wildlife paths and meadows where creatures customarily passed. 7 days afterward, the team retrieved the memory cards from the trail cameras. The recordings largely aligned with Aaron's predictions. Sightings of elk and mule deer, a coyote passing by at first light. One device recorded a black bear foraging beside a fallen log, nothing out of the ordinary. As Aaron scrolled through image after image of routine animal activity, he sensed his initial assessment had been spot on. That changed when he accessed the data from camera 6. The timestamp indicated 2:47 a.m. The scene depicted a slim, open space flanked by pine trees lit up by the infrared light. Initially, the frame held nothing. Then, an entity slid in from the left. Aaron froze the video and bent in toward the monitor. The form was massive, comparable to an adult grizzly in scale. Yet the build felt distorted. Its shoulders rode unusually elevated. The visible legs, captured in fuzzy movement, stretched out disproportionately compared to any bear he'd researched. It traversed the glade with a bounding stride, somewhat erect, its head twisting side to side like it was surveying the terrain. Running the footage at reduced speed revealed the being's eyes catching the infrared in a peculiar green hue. The coat, assuming it was hair, appeared ragged and patchy. Midway through, it halted dead center and pivoted to face the lens, as though detecting the setup. It remained motionless for 3 seconds, and that's when Aaron grasped the camper's description of its unnatural bearing. This wasn't the relaxed vigilance of a bear assessing its environment. It carried an intentional assessing quality, akin to how a human might halt upon noticing an observer. Moments later, it sank onto all fours and vanished from view. Aaron replayed the segment 5 additional times. He forwarded it to Julia with no accompanying note. She phoned him within 10 minutes. "What in the world is that thing?" she demanded, tension lacing her tone. "No idea," he confessed. They scrutinized the rest of the camera's outputs. Just one more registered a comparable anomaly. A remote figure slipping among the trees at the shot's periphery, far too obscured and swift for precise breakdown. Still, the stride matched, the stature matched. Aaron forwarded the material to the park's wildlife management team, attaching a precisely phrased memo. Unidentified large animal observed on northern range. Request consultation with mammal specialists. 2 days passed before a reply arrived. The expert, a female biologist boasting 3 decades in the field, reviewed the clips and contacted Aaron personally. Quote 60, she stated. Quote 61, she hesitated. Aaron held his breath. Quote 62, she concluded softly. Quote 63. He followed through. In the ensuing fortnight, the devices snagged 3 further snippets. All were fleeting, hazy, frustratingly vague. All displayed identical mismatched dimensions, that peculiar stride, and an impression that the entity had adapted to navigate the woods while staying tantalizingly beyond sharp focus. Sightings from park-goers persisted. These now featured accounts of eerie calls, deep, vibrating noises that began resembling a bull elk's bugle before morphing into a guttural snarl. A trekker captured the sound via her smartphone. Aaron played it back through earbuds, his gut clenching as the vocalization morphed seamlessly in the midst, blending one animal's call into another's without transition. "It's copying," Julia observed when he shared it with her. "Certain creatures pull that off. Lyrebirds, mockingbirds, a few parrot varieties." "Not mammals," Aaron countered. "And definitely not in that fashion. That's no mimicry for courtship or claiming space. It comes across as probing." She offered no rebuttal. At the start of July, Aaron teamed up with a temporary ranger called Marcus to probe a complaint about slain livestock on adjacent private property. A local rancher had discovered 2 missing calves, both bearing gashes that deviated from standard predator patterns. The cuts ran profound and precise, surgical even in spots. The remains had been shifted part way, pulled a brief span before being left behind, suggesting the perpetrator had simply grown disinterested. While Marcus snapped pictures, Aaron inspected the location. The paw prints encircling the site were chaotic, churned up by the rancher's footwear and his hounds. Yet near the incident's border, imprinted in damp soil by a stream, Aaron spotted one pristine impression. It dwarfed a grizzly's, stretched longer yet slimmer, with talons reaching beyond those of any bear on record. The footpad felt overly drawn out, the digits arranged in a pattern implying an altered balance of weight. He gauged its size, took shots, and crafted a plaster mold. Once back at headquarters, he cross-checked it against his full array of track databases. No correspondences emerged. Quote 68, Marcus proposed. A congenital anomaly, an ancient wound, or perhaps an alteration in its gait. Those were the logical possibilities. Aaron acknowledged them with a nod as it made sense on paper. Yet deep down he dismissed the notion. No malformation could exhibit the fluid precision captured on the video. Wounded creatures didn't prowl campsites with such deliberate restraint. That evening, as he lay restless in his quarters, Aaron mentally reviewed each incident. The eyewitness accounts, the recordings, the footprints, the eerie sounds. Collectively, they sketched an entity that defied conventional classifications. It wasn't a bear, nor human, nor mere folklore. After all, legends didn't produce molded casts or heat signature clips. A week on, Aaron was guiding a wildlife observation session for rangers and trainees. They ventured into the hotspot of recent reports, advancing cautiously while stopping to inspect droppings and tree scrapes. The midday air felt balmy, the woods alive with chirps and rustles near Forg. Upon reaching a gentle rise, Aaron sensed the sudden hush. His companions did as well. Chatter faded. They halted in a scattered formation, eyes sweeping the foliage. Not a leaf quivered in the stillness. No avian cries pierced the quiet. Even the bugs ceased their drone. Something predatory close by. Aaron murmured steadily to keep nerves in check. Likely a bear. Stick together. Yell if I say so. They pressed on at a measured pace. Aaron's fingers brushed the bear repellent clipped to his belt. 50 yards up, the path descended into a tight pass flanked by stony ledges, dense woods on either side. Nearing it, Marcus, who was a step in front, froze and lifted a hand. Quote 71, he breathed, gesturing leftward. Aaron peered where indicated. Amid the tree breaks, roughly 60 feet from the path, a figure loomed in the dimness. Enormous and bipedal, its shoulders towered at least 7 feet high. Every contour clashed with Aaron's wildlife expertise. Torso too slender, arms overly elongated, skull tilted in a manner alien to ursine stance. It observed them intently. Aaron felt the intensity of that focus, like how a deer senses a lone wolf's selection from the pack. His throat tightened. He stayed rooted. Everyone did. For 10 seconds, the silhouette held still. Then, soundlessly and unhurried, it pivoted and melted into the thicker brush. No flight, no panic, just a casual withdrawal, as if satisfied with the view. The woods stayed mute for 30 more seconds. Abruptly, as if released, the birdsong returned. Bugs buzzed anew. A light wind rustled the leaves overhead. Quote 72, an intern whispered, her words scarcely carrying. Aaron stayed silent. He had no words. They wrapped up the session ahead of schedule. At headquarters later, talk was sparse. Aaron submitted a thorough report, richer in detail than prior ones, incorporating accounts from all 6 witnesses. The observation got recorded, reviewed in a team huddle, and then tucked away discreetly. Formally, the park chalked up the incidents to mistaken animal IDs. Black bears, grizzlies, or maybe a crossbreed acting oddly from hunger or boundary disputes. The communications lead prepared a release calming tourists that the park's fauna was fully cataloged and under watch. Aaron offered no rebuttal. He left his surveillance gear active. He stuck to his rounds, and when fresh rangers sought tips on the northern sector, he delivered the usual protocols on bears, vocal warnings, and food storage. Then, in a subdued tone, he'd append a caution. "If you're out there as twilight falls," he advised, "and the woods fall utterly still, spotting a form edging the tree line that seems off somehow, don't attempt to classify it. Don't draw near. Pivot. Retrace your steps and keep going until you're clear of that zone." Most figured he meant grizzlies. He allowed the misconception for the truth that Yellowstone harbored a presence adept at slipping through the cracks of the familiar and the enigmatic, one that observed, imitated, and analyzed those who believed themselves the observers. Wasn't a discovery Aaron ever wished to confirm. Certain enigmas, he'd realized, belonged in the logs, noted yet unresolved, witnessed yet unlabeled. Lucy had been conducting educational tours in Yellowstone for 5 years when she first encountered the complete tale of the Singing Gorge myth. By that point, she figured she'd mastered every park anecdote. Stories of scalding pools, ensnaring careless sightseers. The saga of the warden lost in a snowstorm, discovered 3 weeks after, surviving unscathed but amnesiac about his ordeal. Those fireside yarns tourists adored, blending fact with flourish to render the wild both thrilling and alluring. The tale of the gorge reached her subtly, shared by an elderly seasonal ranger called Tom on a quiet night at the staff lodge. This particular gorge wasn't well known. It lay along the park's western boundary, reachable via a somewhat challenging path that wound upward through thick woods before emerging at a craggy vantage point high above. The terrain plunged abruptly into a slender ravine, roughly 80 feet in depth, its sheer sides crammed with twisted pines gripping the cliffs. At the base, a slender stream flowed, its murmur detectable, yet seldom seen amid the foliage. The sound carried peculiarly in that spot. Noises ricocheted from the rocks in unusual ways, allowing a shout from one rim to arrive at the opposite, amplified and warped, as if the echo had been pulled out too long. Tom mentioned that locals steered clear of the overlook as twilight fell. He recounted the ancient yarn handed down from the ranchers and hunters who roamed the area long before it turned into a park. It cautioned that when the breeze channeled through the gorge just right, you'd catch singing. Not the howl of wind over stones, not cries from wildlife. Singing in an unfamiliar tongue, swelling and dipping like a cradle song. Quote 73. Lucy inquired with a faint grin, anticipating some joke. Tom didn't grin in return. Depends on the teller, he replied. Some claim it's a trapper who plummeted to his death there back in the 1800s. Others insist it's far more ancient. Indigenous folks once shunned the region altogether, dubbing it a fragile spot where the divide between this world and the next felt perilously thin. Lucy stored the anecdote in her mind, labeling it as mere myth, and paid it no further heed until the park tasked her with creating a fresh sunset activity for guests. They sought something evocative, blending the area's natural past with its regional traditions. The overlook fit ideally, striking vistas, excellent sound for narratives, straightforward for family outings. Beginning in late June, she guided small crowds there bi-weekly. Crowds of 15 to 20 assembled on the level rock platform as daylight faded to a warm glow. She discussed the rock's formation, how relentless water and glaciers had sculpted the gorge across countless years. She highlighted the quirky sound effects, showing how a murmur from one edge carried distinctly to the far side. And since audiences invariably craved the eerie bit, she shared the myth of the voices. She presented it playfully, stressing it was legend rather than reality, and how breezes and reverberations might mimic human tones. The crowds adored it. They edged closer, gazes alert, darting wary looks toward the chasm as though anticipating some emergence from its depths. For the initial month, all proceeded normally. Lucy shared the tale. Folks posed queries. They snapped pictures and descended the path prior to total nightfall. It proved a solid initiative, popular, precisely the sort the park had envisioned. Then, toward the end of July, a lady drew near her following one sunset gathering. The others had scattered toward the trail's start, but this one hung back until privacy allowed. Quote, 76, she murmured. Lucy frowned in confusion. Quote 77. Quote 78. The lady's tone held firm, though her fingers twisted tightly, joints whitening. At first, I figured it was staged. Maybe a hidden playback or such. But it didn't resemble electronics. It seemed to emanate from below. She gestured at the gorge. A chill crept over Lucy. yet she maintained a calm facade. Out here, gusts play odd games with audio. They can snatch distant sounds and direct them right through. Perhaps it was hikers on a nearby route. The woman inclined her head gradually, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Possibly. But it resembled speech, not in English, and it ceased exactly when your narrative ended, as if paying attention. Lucy reassured her it was merely sonic illusion, expressed gratitude for attending, and observed her departure. By herself on the promontory, Lucy paused at the brink and strained to hear. A gentle breeze stirred. The stream burbled faintly underneath. Off in the distance, an elk's call echoed. Nothing out of the ordinary. She reasoned the guest had been swayed by the account. That anticipation colors what we sense, that individuals detect what they anticipate. 14 days on, the occurrence repeated. Another attendee, a fellow in his 60s this time, drew her apart as the party departed. He inquired civilly yet insistently about her choice to incorporate a voice track into an event focused on the landscape's innate echoes. He described hearing the melody vividly amid the stillest segment of her presentation, faint yet sharp, originating from the gorge's way. He depicted it as aged and sorrowful, akin to a forgotten cradle tune, hummed by one whose lyrics had largely escaped memory. Lucy reviewed her records. The routine remained unaltered. No sound additions had been made. She suggested it was reverberations, or possibly a separate party echoing from below. He took her words at face value, but disbelief etched clearly across his features. On that particular evening, Lucy made her way back to the vantage point by herself. She rationalized it as a routine inspection, verifying the path signs and ensuring no new dangers had arisen that could impact upcoming events. In reality, though, she craved confirmation straight from the source. She reached the spot right as the sun vanished behind the hilltop. Twilight was closing in rapidly, with the chasm beneath already cloaked in darkness. Positioning herself at the brink, she folded her arms to ward off the cooling air and strained to listen. For what seemed like ages, only the breeze, the rush of water, and the gentle sway of pine needles filled the air. Then, with the final trace of daylight gone, a soft, far-off tune emerged from the depths of the ravine. It was tuneless in terms of lyrics, yet rhythmic, looping back on itself in measured, deliberate cycles. This wasn't the howl of the wind, nor was it a mere reverberation. It resembled a fragile, weathered voice crooning what could have been an ancient cradle song. Lucy's breath hitched in her throat. She retreated a step from the precipice, her heart racing. The melody persisted, steady and oblivious to her being there. She groped for her cell phone, fished it out, and launched the audio capture feature. Her fingers quivered as she aimed it toward the valley. The song went on. Now it rang out more distinctly, undulating in a sequence that seemed intentional, nearly like dialogue. She captured it for a solid 2 minutes until it trailed off, not suddenly, but easing away as if its maker were retreating into the distance. Without delay, she replayed the clip. Her own respiration was audible, along with the fabric of her coat brushing and the subtle sigh of the breeze, and woven through it all, undeniably that haunting refrain. Yet upon closer scrutiny, another element surfaced in the track. beneath the melody, so subtle it nearly escaped notice, lay an additional noise. Her voice, her exact voice, uttering phrases she hadn't voiced while taping, phrases from an hour prior during the session. The divide between this world and whatever lay beyond wasn't nearly as firm as it ought to have been. Her earlier statements echoed back at her, originating from a spot where no capture should have been feasible. Lucy halted the audio. In the encroaching gloom, she gripped her phone with unsteady hands, sensing the vast drop beneath her transform from mere terrain into something far more ominous. Like an orifice, a passage, a realm that absorbed noises and returned them altered. She departed the viewpoint in haste, not sprinting, but moving briskly, without a backward glance. The following week, she discreetly altered her sunset presentation. She relocated it to another spot, a grassy promontory offering unobstructed views and free of any sonic quirks. To her manager, she explained that the initial area posed too many barriers for visitors. He accepted it without probe. She never formally documented the eerie audio, knowing any account would come across as stress-induced fancy or hallucination. Still, she held on to the file. Alone in her cabin, with earbuds in and sound cranked up, she reviewed it 2 more times. On each listen, the segment featuring her duplicated speech varied just a touch. The content remained identical, but the inflection evolved. Initially, it mimicked a straightforward replay. Next, it felt like an attempt at mimicry by another. By the third, it carried the desperation of her voice, pleading for aid. She erased it then. When novice staff inquired about prime spots for dusk talks, she suggested alternatives. The ravine never came up. If they stumbled upon it independently and inquired, she'd note the sound dynamics were erratic. Echoes propagated unpredictably, complicating crowd control for safety. Every bit of that rang true. What she withheld was that certain locales retained echoes of noises that traversed them. The chasm had been amassing voices for ages beyond reckoning, embedding them in the rock and gusts, replaying them under fitting circumstances. And once it claimed yours, it rehearsed. It honed. It mastered twisting your speech into an imitation that echoed you, yet wasn't. Tom had nailed it. A fragile veil. And as that divide grew sheerer, the ravine yearned to speak, not as gusts or streams or stone, but as you. The next year, Lucy departed Yellowstone. She accepted a position at an arid national site where the landscape stretched broad and level, with audio traveling direct and reliable paths. She never disclosed her true motive for going, yet on still nights, as breezes bore murmurs from far-off routes, she caught herself tuning in intently, alert for any that might resemble hers. Daniel had overseen wilderness access approvals for 7 years before the trend caught his eye. His role was largely clerical, the sort that confined him to paperwork more than he preferred. Trekkers visited his workspace, completed paperwork, settled charges, and got approvals for reserved overnight spots dotting the park's isolated zones. Every campsite was assigned a unique code, along with a cap on the number of visitors allowed, plus a rigorous process for logging arrivals and departures to monitor exactly who was out in the remote areas. The setup functioned smoothly thanks to its straightforward design, reliability, and reliance on folks adhering to straightforward guidelines. The vast majority complied. A small number didn't. That was to be expected. What stood out as unusual, though, was Campsite 17. Nestled in a tight ravine along the park's eastern boundary, it required a 10-mile trek via thick woods and over 2 intermittent streams to reach. It didn't draw crowds. The path climbed sharply. The spot was compact, lacking any stunning vistas or standout attractions to pull in adventurers. Most trekkers opted for prettier locations, yet reservations for Site 17 popped up consistently. About 2 or 3 groups per season, typically seasoned campers seeking isolation. The issue? Not a single one ever formally signed out. The park skipped mandatory exits at ranger posts. The process assumed that when a reservation lapsed, the group had vacated the wilderness. If anyone vanished, alerts fired off fast. Late reservations sparked hunts. But Site 17 lingered in an odd bureaucratic blind spot. Reservations got handed out. Issues never surfaced in reports. Extensions went unfiled. No rescue teams mobilized. The adventurers just faded from the records once their time was up. Nobody paid attention until Daniel began probing. It kicked off as casual interest on a quiet afternoon. While scanning vintage reservation forms into digital files, he spotted that Site 17 boasted an oddly large tally of bookings across 3 decades, all lacking matching exit verifications. He compared the names against event logs, searching for everyday reasons. Perhaps exits happened elsewhere, or files got shuffled wrong. Zilch turned up. No event logs, no other exits, no chase-up comments. The reservations just concluded, and the bureaucracy chugged along. Daniel delved into older archives, 4 decades worth. Site 17 had opened in the late 1970s, and the trend persisted. Scores of names, scores of bookings, 0 wrap-ups. He scanned for fatalities, extractions, or clues to the discrepancy. A few disconnected events showed, but nothing linked to that outpost. He raised it with his boss, a detail-oriented lady called Helen, who'd served the park for 2 decades. She heard him out, furrowed her brow, and accessed her files. Quote 82, she remarked after a lengthy pause. That's peculiar. Still, no one's ever submitted a disappearance claim linked to it. If folks were disappearing, it'd be obvious. But would it? Daniel wondered aloud. If a solo trekker sets out with no one awaiting their return on a set date, how much time passes before alarm bells ring? Helen paused without replying. They both grasped the reality. The park sprawled enormously. Individuals slipped through gaps. Rarely. Yet it occurred. Organize a sweep, she instructed at last. Head over, inspect the area, determine if something's amiss on the ground. It could merely be an office slip-up echoing through the years. Daniel concurred. It made sense as the logical follow-through. He set out on a bright early September dawn, solo, with a lightweight pack holding hydration, a sat phone, and his documentation. The route matched his memory, a challenging ascent, nothing special, twisting amid lodgepole pines and over rough patches where roots jutted out, complicating steps. The latter stream was shallow, just a dribble. He hopped rocks to cross and pressed on. Site 17 matched the charts precisely. A modest open space, central fire pit, level ground for shelter, and a food-hanging post for bears. Foliage hemmed it on three flanks. A subtle animal path extended beyond, delving farther into the gorge. No red flags, no perils. He circled the edges methodically, scanning for risks. No wobbly trees. No debris slides. The fire pit aged but held firm. The post stood sturdy. He looked for animal traces, spotting only standard elk pellets and aged droppings possibly from coyotes. Nothing hinted at threats rendering it hazardous. That's when the equipment caught his eye. It lay partially concealed in the brush by the tree line, easy to overlook without intent. A weathered green stuff sack, material frayed in spots yet identifiable. Within, a corroded camp stove, a shattered purifier, and a frayed chart. Daniel knelt and studied it closely. The chart, ancient and thick, had stiffened from time and dampness. Corners flaked at his touch. He discerned a year in the margin, 1983. He snapped pictures, sealed the finds, and kept hunting. In under 20 minutes, additional items emerged. A fractured tent stake, snarled in roots. A sole so worn its measurements escaped him. A tin cup bearing an inscription on its base. Characters eroded but faintly readable. Every item hailed from a distinct period, various decades, various parties. Nothing had been intentionally concealed or interred. It was just abandoned over time, gradually overtaken by the woods. He made his way back to the open space and settled onto a level stone beside the fire pit, attempting to reason it out step by step. Folks misplace their belongings. Folks ditch broken tools instead of hauling them away. Yet this quantity, spanning so many years, concentrated in a single spot. It defied typical explanations. He retrieved the printed permit logs from his pack and laid them across his knees. He skimmed through, noting names and dates, then surveyed the clearing once more. On a sudden whim, he headed to the site's boundary where the animal path extended into thicker woodland. He trailed it for about 50 yards, advancing cautiously, gaze fixed on the earth below. The initial burial site was faint, scarcely more than a slight dip, outlined by a row of rocks that could have been arranged on purpose or scattered by chance. He nearly overlooked it. But as he knelt to inspect the rocks up close, he realized they'd been positioned deliberately, not scattered by weathering. The layout was far too precise. His heart rate surged. He pressed on along the path, scrutinizing with greater intensity. Roughly 100 yards from the camp, he spotted a second indentation, this one more pronounced and ringed with additional stones. Then a third. He quit tallying after 5. Daniel retreated gradually and headed back to the clearing. His fingers trembled. He extracted the satellite phone and dialed Helen. His words rushed yet precise, tone strained. "Send law enforcement to Site 17, he instructed. "And perhaps a forensics unit. I don't believe anyone ever departed from here. I think they're still around." The probe stretched over several weeks. Experts deployed cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and specialists in remains recovery. Their discoveries validated Daniel's gravest fears. Human bones, ranging from fresh to ancient, some dating back decades, interred in rudimentary graves no farther than a quarter-mile from the camp. Not every unclaimed permit corresponded to a corpse. Certain sets of remains stayed unidentified. Others linked to long-dormant missing persons reports from prior years. Reports that had stalled since searchers never considered checking an authorized, lawful campground. The puzzle that gripped all involved was the mechanism. How had this evaded detection for so long? The revelation, pieced together gradually via witness accounts, vintage diaries, and unearthed clues, chilled with its straightforward horror. Site 17 had served as a base for an individual who wasn't there as a guest. An individual versed in the permitting process, aware of ranger routes, skilled at timing arrivals to coincide with lone trekkers, and vanishing ahead of inspections. For over 30 years, the site had functioned as a predatory lair, and the safeguards meant to shield visitors had unwittingly funneled a reliable stream of solitary prey. Searchers uncovered a cache about a mile distant, a hidden stash containing identification cards, purses, and notebooks seized from those who perished. The script in the notebooks didn't match the permit holders' names. Someone had meticulously documented entries, techniques, and burial specifics, mirroring the bureaucratic diligence Daniel applied to permit oversight. The culprit was never apprehended. Whether through death, relocation, or cessation, that person was gone. The cache showed no updates in more than 10 years. The newest bones traced to 12 years prior. Once the inquiry wrapped up, Daniel endeavored to resume his duties, but it proved impossible. Each permit application triggered visions of the eerie sequence, the roster of souls who ventured into Site 17 and failed to emerge. He reflected on the occasions he might have issued a fatal authorization, offering cheerful farewells and safe journey wishes. Come the following season, he shifted to another role in a separate preserve, something centered on educating tourists, steering clear of permit handling forever. He claimed it was for a fresh start. He kept silent about the nightmares of superficial tombs, the tidy stone borders, the forest's knack for devouring lives so utterly that even a monitoring framework crumbled. Site 17 got permanently shuttered, its label vanished from charts, paths diverted, and the zone assigned to ongoing surveillance without fanfare. The park authorities stayed mum publicly. Tourism was delicate. Tales such as this risked greater harm than blazes or wildlife assaults. Still, trail patrollers in remote areas were in the know. They shared the account in hushed exchanges, invariably capping it with identical counsel. Should a campground appear idyllic, seem overly ideal, offer every weary wanderer's desire without a hint of suspicion, proceed with care. For in the wilds, threats aren't always the beasts with hides and talons. Occasionally, they're the figures who master the rules, grasping that prime hunting spots are those where folks feel secure. Daniel forsook solo treks in the remote trails thereafter. When younger park rangers questioned his insistence on teaming up for patrols, his compulsive review of permit records, or his habit of visiting campsites beyond what guidelines called for, he offered the identical brief reply. The setup functions properly only when folks adhere to the regulations, he explained, and some simply don't. He left it vague who those folks might be, the trail users or the lurkers in wait. It took Olivia 3 years on boundary duty to grasp the significance of those skeletal signs. Patrolling the edges wasn't flashy work. the sort overlooked in promo materials or info films at the Welcome Center. As colleagues conducted workshops or aided lost trekkers, Olivia's routine involved trekking the isolated borders where public grounds bordered private holdings, scanning for unlawful acts like hunting violations, unauthorized entry, or harm from rogue vehicles. Now and then she'd encounter trespassing sportsmen who'd unwittingly stepped over, quick to apologize and comply. Far more frequently, she spotted signs of deliberate boundary breakers who were fully aware yet disregarded it. Her initial encounter with the bone setup struck her as ordinary. Wildlife remnants were routine in the wilderness. Carnivores took down prey. Cleanup crews dispersed the remains. Skeletons turned up in unexpected spots, jammed in boulders, or partially sunk in stream beds. Spotting a deer's frame leaned on a trunk, courtesy of a coyote's haul and drop-off, was no surprise. Yet these were distinct. They formed patterns. Intentionally positioned in casual loops around tree trunks, all oriented toward the center, all faded pale from exposure to elements. The debut grouping held 6 distinct fragments: ribs, a thigh bone, a jaw segment from varied species: elk, deer, perhaps bighorn sheep. She snapped images, noted the coordinates, and continued. Sometimes foragers hoarded such items. Crows and similar scavengers gathered them. Peculiar, sure, but nothing to fret over. A quarter-mile ahead, by a skinny track that sportsmen followed to nearby forest preserves, came the next setup. Identical layout, skeletal pieces hugging tree roots, pointed inside, forming an approximate 15-foot ring. Here, an extra detail caught her eye. The earth within seemed churned, richer in hue than nearby dirt, carrying a subtle artificial odor, reminiscent of scorched synthetics or factory cleaners. She knelt for a nearer look. The dirt felt soft, freshly overturned. Blended with an intruder, perhaps cinders or traces of ignition fluid. She collected specimens, sealed them, and pinned the spot via her device. In the following fortnight, 4 additional groupings surfaced, all sighted along that boundary segment, close to entry paths or routes from non-park areas, all featuring the signature inward bone circle, all surrounding zones of upturned, contaminated ground. She briefed her boss, Garrett, a veteran of more than 10 years in park policing. He studied her shots and specimens, his expression growing sterner. Quote, 85, he mused deliberately. Quote, 86. Quote, 87. Olivia suggested. Quote, 88. Garrett took it seriously, passing the details to the park's probe unit and calling for a team revisit with extra hands. 2 weeks on, she went back with him and Kowalski, a federal enforcer focused on animal-related offenses. They trekked to the original spot as a unit. The bones lingered, save for one slightly shifted, likely by wildlife. The central patch stayed shadowed and messy. Kowalski dropped to a knee, inhaled, and winced. "No mere fire remnants," he declared. "That's synthetic, factory-grade, and it's lingered some time." He fetched a foldable tool and started excavating with precision, lifting soil in thin strata. At 6 inches, it struck resistance. He paused, cleared debris with protected fingers, revealing an edge of thick sheeting. Olivia's gut clenched. Garrett edged in, fingers drifting to his communicator. Kowalski eased the wrap loose bit by bit, bearing further contents. It was bound firm, taped shut, marred by greasy smears. With cautious slices, he unfolded the cover. Another liner hid below, and under it more bones, not from beasts, but people. The dig spanned 4 days. Government operatives deployed specialists in forensics, scent hounds for remains, and subsurface scanners. They revealed a series of modest burial pits running a 2-mile swath of the park's perimeter. Every grave site was indicated by those eerie bone circles, each holding human bones in different stages of decay. The earliest ones were over 10 years old, while the newest had been interred less than 2 years ago. Several victims were identified swiftly via dental records or DNA matches, but others required more time. A handful remained unidentified forever, their remains too far gone, their personal histories erased by the passage of time and harsh conditions. As Olivia pored over the reports, a chilling pattern emerged that left her nauseated. Many of the victims had been listed as missing persons earlier on, yet none originated from Yellowstone itself. They hailed from adjacent states, typically from at-risk groups like wanderers, escapees from home, or folks whose vanishings barely sparked any real effort to find them, since few had bothered to search diligently from the start. Piecing together forensics and mapping data, the team's hypothesis pointed to a perpetrator who had exploited the park's edge as a dumping route for years. The isolation was perfect for it. Rangers patrolled sparingly. The rugged landscape kept most people away, and those bone arrangements, the detectives surmised, played a double role. They deterred those in the know from getting closer, while aiding the killer in pinpointing the spots for later visits if required. Olivia collaborated closely with the investigators, leading them along familiar patrol paths and spotlighting potential spots based on the lay of the land and entry routes. This uncovered 3 additional burial areas past the first finds. All featured bones laid out in that same intentional inward-pointing design. The culprit eluded capture entirely. The probe flagged a few suspects, such as a contractor with entry to the zone during the relevant period and a long-distance truck driver whose hauls skirted the park. Yet nothing led to arrests. Proof was indirect at best. No witnesses came forward. Within a year, the case stalled and joined the stack of unresolved mysteries in outlying regions where overlapping authorities and limited funds hampered progress. 6 months post-excavation, Olivia sought a reassignment. She confided in Garrett her desire to shift to a busier park section, one involving more public engagement and fewer solitary treks on remote paths. He got it and didn't push back. On her final boundary hike before departing, the burial spots were already refilled, the earth leveled, the bone setups cleared and logged for the records. Only slim metal pins stuck in the dirt hinted at what had transpired, each labeled with a sequential code for later tracking. She traversed the full 2-mile stretch of rough ground and thick woods, carrying the burden of every name she'd encountered in the case files. Individuals stripped down to mere file references and lab summaries, hidden in spots no one would suspect, signaled solely by animal bones formed into rings that held meaning only for the initiated. At the patrol's remotest end, where the path looped back into the park's heart, she paused and gazed across the treetops. From that vantage, the expanse appeared boundless, a vast expanse of foliage and rock rolling out to far-off peaks. Stunning, serene, uncaring. Her mind drifted to the individual behind it all, the one versed in the ranger rounds, the secluded byways, the dense thickets that could conceal virtually anything. She reflected on the occasions she might have passed mere feet from a burial mound, oblivious to it. The times those bone formations had stood there, undiscovered in their significance. A raven's cry pierced the air from a close branch, sharp and toneless. She looked up. The creature fixed her with a single dark eye, its head cocked as though anticipating a response. She pivoted and headed back to the starting point, maintaining an even stride, resisting the urge to glance behind, to conjure visions of lingering threats in the gaps between her rounds. The wilderness sprawled immeasurably. The perimeter stretched on, and a heavy conviction settled in her like lead, that not every grave had surfaced. Her fresh role placed her in the more accessible zones, handling guest support and leading sessions on animal awareness. In many respects, it was simpler. Routine shifts, company rather than isolation, inquiries about buffalo and hot springs rather than skeletal rings and churned earth. Still, she couldn't shake the routine of eyeing the edges of the woods. She always stayed alert to misplaced bones or soil that seemed unnaturally shadowed, and whenever fellow rangers sought her input on edge duty, she delivered the identical caution each time. If you spot bones set in any design, she'd advise, her tone even and matter-of-fact, particularly if they're curved inward like a ring, note the position right away and report it without delay. Avoid making contact with them. Leave the spot undisturbed and don't presume their presence is coincidental. Many inquired about the reason. She never shared specifics. Instead, she'd mention that certain individuals treated the wilds as more than just spots for trekking or shooting game, and the park's isolation drew them for motives unrelated to leisure activities. A handful of rangers pushed for further details. Those were the individuals she later drew aside privately, away from the group, to reveal the reality of the burial sites, the casualties, and the culprit who had treated the perimeter as a disposal site for an extended period. This person relied on the seclusion, the crisscrossing authorities, and the park's immense scale to conceal their offenses forever. She explained that the investigation remained officially active, though clues had vanished and funding had shifted elsewhere. She warned that the perpetrator could still roam free, possibly exploiting secluded spots in different reserves, continuing to signal graves with skeletal remains and banking on folks overlooking the alerts right in front of them. She urged them to heed their gut feelings. If a situation seemed off, it likely was. If the woods felt unusually still, if the earth carried an unnatural scent, if they spotted arrangements defying logical wildlife causes, they ought to record it, notify superiors, and avoid returning solo. 2 years after, Olivia departed Yellowstone for a seaside reserve where the terrain lay exposed and edges were defined by waves rather than woods. She convinced herself it was for professional growth, a fresh environment, and various sensible justifications that rang true when voiced. Yet on her final afternoon in the lot, vehicle loaded and documents finalized, gazing at the peaks, she sensed mostly ease. Ease from no longer patrolling those edge paths. Ease knowing another would uncover any lingering secrets concealed in the gaps between inspections. And ease, after so long, in sleeping free of visions involving skeletal rings, rudimentary burials, and the methodical efforts of one who discovered that concealing corpses worked best in terrain so expansive that even its guardians couldn't spot it all. She fired up the motor and departed ahead without glancing rearward. The park loomed behind, vast and uncaring, safeguarding its mysteries as ever, under foliage, rock, and dirt punctuated solely by remains that passers-by would ignore entirely. Ryan's debut season in Yellowstone resembled entering a tale from another's life. Right upon reaching the Lamar District Station, folks couldn't discuss his role without invoking a prior name. "You'll manage the northeast routes," his boss noted, passing over a chart. The territory the previous ranger oversaw, he was familiar with its every bit. Fellow staff added their thoughts. Inheriting his rounds. Tough act to follow. They didn't spill the whole account initially. Only subtle cues. A look at a vacant storage spot. A hush filling the communications area when an outdated identifier surfaced in records. In time, Ryan assembled the puzzle. 3 years prior, a ranger had perished in that sector amid a turbulent evening operation to locate missing persons, losing footing on slick stone, tumbling into a gully, and succumbing to blood loss before air support arrived. The official summary unfolded like a sobering example. Exhaustion from conditions. Exceeding prudent boundaries to aid a stranded visitor. Ryan reviewed the document twice during his initial days, aiming to view it as guidance rather than omen. Superstition held no sway over him. He trusted procedures and routines. Even so, upon accessing the assigned cubby and noticing the subtle trace of a removed identifier, a chill crept up his spine. The initial strange occurrence struck during his third evening watch. Solo in the compact communications space, he was entering the final logs from the day's exchanges. Beyond the glass, gusts shook the panes while drizzle drummed consistently overhead. The team had dispersed to residences or rest areas. The devices, typically humming with chatter and interference, stood silent. Ryan reclined, massaging his eyelids, as the main receiver sparked suddenly. A steady male tone, somewhat distorted by atmospheric static, emerged on the local frequency. "Base, Unit 53 here from the northern escarpment. Sight lines worsening." Descending to the stream ford to inspect for the tent site's transport. The wording was standard, the delivery assured. The issue was straightforward. No Unit 53 operated that shift, not any longer. That designation had been the fallen Rangers from the file. Ryan scanned the board listing current operations and personnel. Just his code and one nocturnal animal monitor appeared on duty. Nothing for 53. Nobody was spotted on the northern ridge, and no reports came in about a lost hiker that night. He pressed the microphone button, forcing his tone to stay even. "Unit 53, verify your position and duties." The line buzzed with static. After what felt like an eternity, the familiar voice came back, now seeming a bit more distant. Acknowledged. "Dispatch. I'm nearing the creek ford right now. I'll report any signs of tire marks." A chill prickled the skin on Ryan's forearms. He rifled through the records, hunting for references to an ancient audio loop, a planned exercise run-through, or whatever could account for a canned transmission. Zilch. Unit 53. Run that back one more time, he instructed. Who green-lit that route? Silence. The radio crackled briefly before going dead quiet. Outside, the gale picked up, slamming against the structure with enough force to set it groaning. A couple of minutes passed with no further sounds, so Ryan noted the episode as likely crosstalk or spillover from a nearby frequency and convinced himself that wrapped it up. Come morning, he poked around lightly with colleagues. Nobody owned up to staging a practice op. Nobody said they'd caught the broadcast. Bringing up the outdated identifier made a seasoned park warden called Chloe snap her gaze up. Did you pick him up over the air? She pressed. Ryan paused. I caught an echo of sorts. Might have been nosebleed, though it dropped his code, and mentioned checking a vehicle out by the creek ford. Chloe let out a long breath like she'd been pent up for ages. Don't mess around with that, she murmured. Ever since the mishap, we've dealt with radio quirks out here. Worst on stormy evenings. That initial year post-incident, folks tuned in to him relaying path intel from spots nobody was covering. It'd taper off eventually. Sounds like it hasn't quit. He inquired about archived audio. She denied it with a shake. It skips the tape entirely, hits only in real time. Ryan mentally listed off rational causes: outdated cabling, weather quirks, signals ricocheting oddly against the peaks. He looped those thoughts like a chant while setting off on his following shift, his portable radio fastened at his side. The roster of codes now weighing more than before. Things stayed calm for a stretch. He got familiar with the paths. He committed key features to memory. He guided visitors who'd misjudged the trek to the starting point. Under sunny skies, the basin stretched wide and inviting where sunlight and breezes flowed unchecked. In misty dusks, darkness pooled beneath the branches, nudging his pulse higher. He dismissed it as newbie nerves and fancy. Then the visions kicked in. Not flashy terrors involving beasts or specters. Instead, everyday glimpses that disturbed him exactly for their plainness. There he was, traversing paths unfamiliar yet deeply ingrained, navigating patrol beats he swore he'd never trod, but navigated with ease. He hopped certain stones blindly, brushed specific trunks in stride, and scanned far-off crests at precise instants, as though anticipating a sighting. In sleep, the motions rang true, like the ingrained flow from countless repetitions, except they weren't his. The initial awakening left sharp imprints, a backwoods detour linking two bends, a concealed overlook by a waterway ford he'd yet to explore conscious. He wrote it off as a weird blend of guide charts and worries. On the follow-up, he pulled a chart and plotted the dream's course. All markers aligned with actual ground. The overlook was legit. The detour checked out. He'd never covered them alert. He shared the nocturnal oddities with Chloe amid a hushed gap in the vehicle en route to a meeting. She absorbed it all silently, drumming a jagged beat on the dash. Ever get the sense you're recalling events that weren't yours? He ventured, aiming for nonchalance. Chloe's face tightened. Yeah, she admitted after a drawn-out beat. But I figured out to keep it zipped mostly. Folks jumped to burnout breaks and psych checks. He mustered a feeble chuckle. So how do you label it? Her stare fixed ahead. Occasionally, I figure spots hold on to folks. The tracks, the heights, the hollows. They cling to those who roamed them plenty, and if you slip into their patterns, the land either loans you their ways or refuses to release them. That final bit didn't sit right with him. The true challenge hit in early fall, amid the season's opening squall. A group hadn't made it back to base after an afternoon ramble. Their ride lingered at the entry. The heavens, bright at dawn, had soured by midday. Heavy clouds scraped drizzle over the heights. Thunder rumbled afar. The airwaves buzzed with reports as wardens rallied hunt parties. Ryan and Chloe drew the higher stretch of the route, close to the very gully where the prior warden had slipped away seasons past. Everyone noticed the irony, yet the rough landscape required attention, and they were the team on hand. "Stick to the designated route," the supervisor instructed, his gaze fixed on them a bit too long. "Avoid any detours or risks. If the view gets too obscured, retreat immediately." "We're not risking another loss out there. You caught that as well, press on. Unit on Northeast Patrol. Area clear." He added that the paths were undamaged, nothing unusual to note. Faint interference hissed like far-off drizzle. In that brief instant, he imagined an echo overlapping his transmission, a steady, known cadence mirroring his report from a hidden spot nearby. Silence returned to the frequency, abandoning him to the gusts and the feeling that in these wilds, certain tales didn't conclude so much as they blended into the terrain, lingering for the following warden to wander through.